Alright, friends, welcome to Classics in Color, your weekly dive into some of the ancient world's wackiest facts. I'm Marc Graves, and today we'll be talking about some stories from Greek and Roman mythology that seem to involve characters that would appear to us to be something like non-binary. So let's get started. So, quick disclaimer as usual for videos like this, I'm not talking about my own opinions or beliefs in this video for sure. I'm just going to be discussing what ancient people thought, the stories they told, the vocabulary they used, the mindsets and the worldviews that they had, etc. And it's very often not PC at all, so just keep that in mind that I have warned you. And then also I've assembled a pretty extensive list for this video, I think, to share with you, but if there are any stories that I have missed, please share those in the comments below. I'd love to check those out. Ancient Greeks and Romans obviously didn't speak English, so they don't have that term non-binary, but they do clearly recognize that there are people who don't quite fit in the category of male or female. And within that category of otherness, there are many different people and types of people, so they will use different terms for those characters in myth. So I'm going to start off with perhaps the most obvious one, Hermaphroditus, who we get the term hermaphrodite from. So originally he was a he, but this was a young person who was a child of Aphrodite and Hermes, and you can see that in the name. And one day he was wandering through the woods when he found a little lake or stream that was particularly lovely, and he decided he wanted to go swimming. So he took off all his clothes and got in the water, and a young nymph by the name Salamachus saw him and instantly got the hots for him. She was feeling very lustful. And this story is really interesting, not just to us, but to ancient people as well. We're kind of fascinated by this because it's a gender swap or a flip of the trope, which is we have dozens of stories of Zeus or Apollo up to horrible rapey shenanigans where they see a young maiden and they pursue her and they ruin her life. But here it's flipped where there's a goddess, even though it's a minor goddess, she's a nymph pursuing a young male. So that's interesting, and she is trying to seduce him, trying to beg him into sleeping with her, and he's just not feeling it, and he turns her down and he goes for his swim. And she retreats a little bit, but she doesn't give up. She just sort of hides, sets up a little ambush for him, and when he comes close by her, she jumps out at him, grabs on, and prays that she may never be separated from him. And sure enough, they're sort of fused together so that when he comes out of the lake, he realizes that he is now a hermaphrodite. And apparently there was a story that anyone thereafter who swam in this lake or river would emerge a hermaphrodite as well. And Hermaphroditus continues to usually be referred to as a he, but it's pretty clear to everybody that he's not really a he anymore. He's something else. And he's a very popular theme in both art and mythology, so we have lots of examples of people portraying this story or just Hermaphroditus himself or themselves. This next story, I'm cheating a little bit because it isn't really a myth. It's not standard or traditional or anything. It's just a story that got told one time. So this story comes from Plato's Symposium. Symposium is a big drinking festival where everybody drinks lots of wine, they lay around, they listen to music, they have a conversation. And in this particular case, they are discussing philosophy. And the topic is love. What is the nature of eros? And when it gets to Aristophanes' turn to talk, and Aristophanes is this comic poet, so we shouldn't take anything he says too seriously. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. He tells this sort of origin story of humans, where originally we were all actually two humans fused together. And there were three different types. There was man and man, woman and woman, and then man and woman. And again, they're kind of fused at the hip. And so if they wanted to move anywhere, they kind of had to like tumble, like a human tumbleweed instead of a human centipede. But then for reasons, Jupiter smote them all with lightning and split them apart. And so now we wander around forever looking for our other half. And this is generally a pretty funny story because everybody agrees that the man and man combination is far superior to the other two. Why would you ever want to be tainted by a woman in that way where you are joined to her? And it's considered that men who are into women are more feminine, they're more weak and scummy, I guess is the stereotype that they all have. And that obviously the most superior relationship is man on man. So that's kind of funny. But then the combo that is man and woman, the term for that he uses is androgynous, which we get androgynous from because it literally just means man, woman. So that's kind of an interesting little story. And again, I know it's not a myth, but I couldn't leave it out. Next is the story of Attis, who was originally a young man who was very interested in the goddess Cybele. She's a very old fertility goddess, and he goes on this trip into the wilderness in honor of her. And I'm going to tell the rest of the story in the words of the Roman poet Catullus, partly because he tells the story really well, but partly because through his words you get an idea of what his mindset and his reaction to this story are. Borne in his swift bark over deep seas, Attis, when eagerly with speedy foot he reached the Phrygian woodland and entered the goddess's abode's shadowy forest-crowned. There, goaded by raging madness, bewildered in mind, he cut off with a sharp flint the weights of his groin. So, when she felt her limbs to have lost their manhood, still with fresh blood dabbing the surface of the ground, swiftly with snowy hands she seized the light timbrel, thy timbrel, Cybele, thy mysteries, mother, and shaking with soft fingers the hollow ox hide, thus began she to sing to her companions tremulously. So soon as Attis, woman, yet no true one, chanted thus to her companions, the revellers suddenly with quivering tongues yell aloud. The light timbrel rings again, clash again the hollow cymbals, swiftly to green Ida goes the rout with hurrying foot. As soon as Attis himself in his heart reviewed his own deed, and saw with clear mind what he had lost and where he was, with surging mind again he sped back to the waves. Shall I from my home be borne far away into these forests? From my country, my possessions, my friends, my parents, shall I be absent from the market, the resting place, the race course, the playground? For what form of human figure is there which I have not filled? I, now a woman, have been a stripling, a youth, a boy. I was the flower of the playground. I was once the glory of the palæstra. I, part of myself, a barren man shall be. Shall I dwell in icy, snow-clad regions of verdant Ida? I pass my life under the high summits of Phrygia, with a hind that haunts the woodland, with a boar that ranges the forest. Now I rue my deed, now I would it were undone. You can tell Catullus is uncomfortable with this story. He goes back between he and she. He insinuates that she's not really a woman, but also insinuates that he's not really a man. And he's clearly uncomfortable with how to talk about Attis. And he implies that Attis is regretful, remorseful, and that he thinks that he can no longer go home to his family and to his community, that he now has to be forever isolated and separated, which is very sad. And what is difficult about this story from a modern perspective is we don't know if we should just consider Attis a trans woman who wasn't accepted. If nobody thought, well, yes, that is a woman, they just put Attis in this separate other category and wouldn't let him be a woman. Or if Attis would have thought of himself as what we would call a non-binary, if he would put himself in that other category, we can't ask him what he thought. And the other thing is that Attis is not just some obscure mythological tale among hundreds of other tales. He or she or they is considered the first of a whole order of priests dedicated to Cybele. They were called the Galli, and there were a whole order of them in Rome, and they were castrated, and they generally dressed very feminine. So they would wear female clothes, wear lots of makeup and wigs, etc. And we have stories told not by them, by other people about them, so we have to take it all with a grain of salt, but that, again, they would wear lots of women's clothing, that they would go around either begging or telling fortunes to sustain themselves, and that they were really fond of music and dancing and also ritual flogging of themselves. I guess they were maybe a little kinky, at least that's the stories about them. So it's very interesting that although Catullus and Romans in general seem to be very uncomfortable with the Galli and seem to very much other them, they also don't totally reject them. They are okay with them being in their city because they are priests of a very important goddess that nobody wants to mess with her or her priests. So it's definitely an interesting story and phenomenon here that we're looking at. So finally, I'm just going to throw in a few miscellaneous, slightly minor characters here. So we have the gods Aegisthus and Phanes. So these are both considered to be very ancient gods, much older than Zeus and his whole posse, and kind of scary also. So they're both hermaphroditic gods, and Aegisthus apparently was castrated at some point. but then still had an affair with their son, which is, you know, well, it's God, so they kind of do what they want. But then his son wanted to marry this young lady, and Aegisthus was very upset at this. So at the wedding, he drove everyone mad, or they drove everyone mad, and all the men at the wedding castrated themselves, and the bride apparently chopped her own breasts off. So that's brutal. That's unpleasant for sure. Then we have Mestra, who was a young lady who was raped by Poseidon, and then Poseidon granted her one wish, which gods tend to do, which I guess is supposed to make things better. I don't know. But she asked for the ability to shapeshift, which he gave her, and then she would actually use this pretty cleverly to her advantage to make money. So she would have her father or someone sell her as either a woman or as an animal. And then they would take the money, and then after she had been with the merchant for a little while, she would change her shape into a man and then be able to just walk away because the merchant couldn't find the woman or the goat or whatever he had bought. There was just this random man there. So she was kind of clever about that, and I include her because she is changing her gender a little bit. She's not quite all woman anymore, or she can not be a woman if she wants. And then finally are the Anarii or Anare. I don't really know how to say that one, but they were androgynous Scythian shaman. Apparently, we mostly know about them through Herodotus. Herodotus is a Greek historian who thought that these shaman were distasteful, I guess, to put it mildly. He thought they were kind of weird, so he's being a little bit xenophobic, and he says that they were androgynous. He isn't sure why, but he gives two possibilities. One is that they plundered a temple, which is super bad, and then they were cursed for that. Or number two is that they ride horses too much. So I guess if you were riding horses all the time, it's not good for your manly parts and your testosterone. So that's kind of a funny little story there. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed learning about these strange stories. Special thank you to subscribers and to Patreon members. Thank you so much. And I hope to see all of you again next week. Karate.